alien bullies took the Deathworld girls' lunch. 3 hours later, the entire academy bowed to a lunch tray. The commissary smelled like 400 different lunches, and one thing Relax could not identify. It hit his auditory organs first, not a sound but the way sound changed. The low, rolling churn of 200 species eating 200 things went slightly off in one corner of the room, the way a conversation dips when something walks in that does not belong. His nose followed. Sharp, warm, layered, not aggressive exactly, but alive in a way most food smells were not. Most food smells were dead, cooked into submission. This was something else. He was at his usual north wall table, picking through mineral shavings with two of his 4 hands, a stellar cartography assignment open on the desk pad in front of him. The Galactic Academy of Tesseran Prime did not pause for lunch. It ran continuously, 200 species on 200 different sleep cycles, the commissary never fully empty, never fully quiet. Ralex had been here 2 years. He had learned to filter the noise down to the signals that mattered. The signal that mattered was a heartbeat. It came from a small table against the east wall, 2 rows ahead of where he sat in stellar cartography. Steady, slow, slower than it should be for a creature her size, and with a resting rhythm that his auditory organs, the sharpest in the vein species, had been monitoring for longer than he had been willing to admit out loud. He used the word cursed when he thought about it. Cursed with hearing sharp enough to catch a pulse from 30 feet. It meant he could not stop listening. He should have been watching the assignment. He was watching the small table near the east wall instead. Lucy Harper set her bag down without looking at the room. She was 17, 54, dark hair pulled back with what appeared to be elastic material from Earth. Forward-facing eyes. Rilex had a theory about forward-facing eyes that embarrassed him to think about, so he mostly didn't. She moved like someone who had calculated exactly how many steps between the tray return station and her table, and had stopped wasting effort on the calculation long ago. She ate alone. She studied alone. She did not flinch when a Gorvathi shoulder-checked her in the east corridor, which Rilex had witnessed twice. She did not emit fear pheromones. She did not make herself small. She was simply there, in the way a fixed point is there, unmoved by the fact that everything around it moves. Every 2 weeks a cryoflight package arrived from Earth. Today it had arrived. He noticed the lunchbox when she lifted it from her bag. Sealed metal, brushed gray surface, with a small panel on the side that glowed faintly blue as she pressed her thumb against it. A biometric lock, on a food container. He had noted this before and concluded it was excessive. He would later understand, spectacularly wrong about what the lock was for. The Galactic Academy of Tesseran Prime ran on a hierarchy that no policy document acknowledged but everyone understood. At the top, Gorvathi, 8 feet of dark bone plate armor, 4 deep-socketed eyes, tusks that could punch through hull plating. Below them, Scathari with paralytic venom glands in their wrists and the reflexes to use them faster than a conscious thought. Below them, 160 or so other species arranged in a ladder calibrated by size, natural weapons, and the general reputation of your homeworld for producing creatures that could hurt other creatures. Humans sat near the bottom, 1 step above decorative lichen, according to the Species Threat Classification Database, Tier 9. Minimal threat, limited physical capability, requires environmental support. The Terran exchange program had been running for 2 years and had not given anyone reason to revise this. Ralex could hear her heartbeat from here, 62 beats per minute, steady as a metronome, completely unbothered. He opened his lunchbox and ate a protein cube and tried to focus on stellar cartography. He did not see Dressic Maul enter the commissary. He heard him, the way the sound field shifted, not quieter exactly, but reorganized, like a flock of birds adjusting their formation when a larger bird passes through. Chairs moved, conversations rerouted. Species with working threat assessment instincts found reasons to look elsewhere. Dressic Maul, 8 feet, dark bone-plated from shoulder to knee in the burned metal shade particular to Gorvathi from the southern continent. 4 deep-socketed eyes under a ridged brow that made his permanent expression a kind of contemptuous amusement. Tusks long enough to damage a structural support, which Relex would later have cause to remember. He moved with his pack, Vass and Tak on his left, Scathari brothers, thin and fast, with the particular loose-shouldered walk of species that know their venom is faster than anything that could stop them. And behind them, Ghoul, the Plot, a dense gray-blue membrane organism the size of a large bag, moving with a slow rolling motion that left a faint residue on the floor where its edges touched. The pack crossed the commissary in formation. Students moved without being asked. It was efficient. It was practiced. Dressic spotted the small table near the east wall. Relex's stylus stopped moving. He watched Dressic pick up Lucy's sealed lunchbox the way you pick up something that already belongs to you. Casual. Possessive. He held it at eye level and angled it toward his face and drew in a long breath through the Gorvathi centorgans, a performance more than an investigation, aimed at the room, not at her. His 4 eyes moved slowly to Lucy. The noise he made was a low bone-vibrating rumble that translated loosely to, "You think your little soft species slop is too good for a Gorvathi." He was performing. The room was watching. Relex was listening, not just with his ears, but with the specific, careful attention of someone who has been monitoring a single instrument for months and is waiting for it to change. Lucy looked up from her food. Her eyes moved from Dressic's face to the lunchbox in his hand, then back. Her heartbeat, 62 beats per minute, the same number it always was. She said 5 words. "I would not eat that." Flat, factual, the way you might mention a step someone is about to trip over. No weight behind it, no appeal, no performance. A piece of information offered once clearly to someone she expected to make their own decision. Dressic's bone plates shifted the Gorvathi equivalent of a smirk, and he looked at the pack, and the pack looked back. He flicked the biometric seal with one tusk. It held. He applied more force. The panel cracked. He passed it to Vass, who used his venom-tipped nail on the seam, and the container opened. Warm air rose from it. Even from his table, Relex caught the intensified smell, sharper now, aggressively layered, something that made his nasal tissue contract involuntarily. He wrinkled his face without deciding to. Across the room, 3 other students shifted in their seats. One Tory student actually leaned away. The pack ate the contents in under 30 seconds. Dressic tossed the empty lunchbox back. It hit the table with a clatter and slid to rest in front of Lucy. She looked at the empty container. Then she reached into her backpack and produced a second sealed container, smaller, soft-sided, different material, and opened it. Inside, 2 slices of soft pale material with a dark reddish-brown substance between them. She picked it up and took a bite. Relex realized, with a feeling he did not immediately have a name for, that she had brought a backup. What happens when a girl who carries a backup to her backup sits alone in the exact center of a disaster she already knew was coming? "Stay close. It starts in about 12 minutes. Dressic snorted and turned back to his pack. The show was over. Conversations restarted. The commissary returned to its noise. Relex almost looked away. He did not, because he noticed something. Lucy was not watching Dressic walk away. She was not watching her backup sandwich. She was looking at the clock on the far wall, a round face, galactic standard, the kind that counted minutes in increments of 3, and her heartbeat had changed. Not faster, slower. 4 beats per minute below her baseline. Her breathing had shifted too, longer and steadier, in a pattern he recognized from xenobiology lectures about mammalian autonomic regulation. It was not a fear response. It was not a stress response. It was what happens when a conscious mind has already decided what is going to happen and has switched into the mode where it waits. Relex set down his stylus. He looked at the clock. He did not know what he was counting toward. He started counting anyway. The commissary moved around them. 200 species eating, arguing, clicking, tapping, humming through feeding apparatuses and mandibles, and whatever ghoul used Raylex had never been certain. Lucy finished the backup sandwich. She folded the wrapper with 3 small, precise motions and placed it on the tray. She checked the clock. She straightened her bag strap with one hand, adjusted its position by perhaps 3 centimeters, and placed both hands flat on the table. Raylex realized he had not written a single character of his assignment in 11 minutes. 12 minutes after Dressic ate, Vass stopped mid-sentence. Vass stopped mid-sentence and made a sound no Scathari makes voluntarily. High-pitched, wet from somewhere deep in the throat, the kind of sound that belongs to a much smaller creature in a much worse situation. His wrist snapped up. Not a conscious movement. The venom glands on the inside of his wrists, the ones controlled by the part of the nervous system that does not ask permission, had made their own decision. Paralytic spray in a 3-meter arc. 2 Velian students hit the floor rigid, their wings locked mid-fold. A Quillic crashed sideways into a table, knocking a heating element off its stand. The element hit the decorative plant beside the east wall, dried, ornamental, completely flammable, and the plant caught. Thick gray smoke started climbing toward the ventilation grills in the ceiling. Tox glands went simultaneously, which meant the arc doubled. The atmospheric contamination alarm tripped. Emergency ventilation kicked on at full throughput, which was designed to clear smoke and was very good at clearing smoke. It was also very good at picking up the aerosolized capsaicin particles still hanging in the air near Lucy's table, the ones that had drifted up when Dressic forced the lunchbox open, and distributing them with perfect efficiency through every corner of the commissary. The secondary wave hit students who had touched nothing. A Melody student 3 tables from the east wall collapsed against the wall, both sound organs sealed shut, producing a low, continuous tone that was the Melody equivalent of screaming. 2 crystalline students began vibrating at a frequency that made Raylex's back teeth ache, a sympathetic resonance in his jaw he could not stop. A Tory student who had been eating quietly near the north wall stood up very fast, turned in a complete circle, and sat back down with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body is sending signals their mind has not yet processed. Raylex stood up. He sat back down. He stood up again. Lucy had not moved. She was at the east wall table with the second backup sandwich in both hands and her elbows on the table, watching the room with the calm, interested attention of someone observing weather from inside a window. Her heartbeat, he was still listening. He could not stop listening, was 58 beats per minute, 2 below her already slow baseline, still dropping. Dressic Maul was on his knees. Raylex had never seen a Gorvathi on his knees. He understood academically that it was possible, the way you understand that a structural support column can crack, possible, yes, but not something you expect to see on a Tuesday. Dressic's 4 eyes were streaming fluid from all 4 simultaneously, which in Gorvathi physiology was a systemic shock response, not an emotional one. His bone plates had flushed violet, a deep, pulsing violet that moved from his shoulder plates down to his knee guards in slow waves. His claws were at his own throat, not choking. The airway was clear. Raylex could hear breath moving through it but pressing, as if trying to locate the source of something that could not be located from outside. The sound he was making was a wheeze. High, thin, continuous, from a creature built for warbelows that had, on one documented occasion, cracked the commissary's south-facing observation window. He staggered upright, took 3 steps in no particular direction, walked directly into the structural support column to the left of the food service counter with enough force that the column's outer casing cracked along a 30-centimeter vertical line. He bounced off it without registering the impact, hit a table. The table went over. He went down with it and curled around his midsection on the floor, and made the low, grinding groan of a large animal that has encountered something it has no framework for. Raylex made a note in the margin of his assignment. The column will need to be inspected. He did not know why he wrote that. His hands were doing things independently of his intentions at this point. Then Ghoul changed color. Raylex knew plaque biology well enough to know that this was not good. A healthy plaque ran gray-blue, the color of still water under cloud cover. A mildly stressed plaque went pale, almost silver. What Ghoul was doing was not pale. Ghoul was going orange. Not the soft orange of a Cathali sunrise, not an amber or a coral. A vivid, screaming, internally lit orange that pulsed from somewhere deep inside the membrane like a warning beacon that had given up on being subtle. Then the mucus came. Under normal stress conditions, a plaque produces a thin, mildly acidic film across its outer membrane. It was not, Raylex's xenobiology notes had informed him, considered dangerous. Under extreme stress conditions, the notes had also mentioned, output increased. The notes had not specified by how much. Raylex was now in a position to provide that data personally. What Ghoul produced in the next 60 seconds was a flood. Viscous, rolling, the color of old cooking oil. It spread across the floor tiles in a growing radius, and where it touched the tile surface the finish dissolved, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, the way ice melts. Students ran. 3 of them slipped in the outer edge of the spreading pool and went down. One student tried to jump over it, cleared the near edge, landed on a compromised tile that had lost structural integrity, and went through it up to her knee with a sound like wet paper tearing. The cleaning drones activated. 8 of them poured out of their wall housings and flew directly into the mucus field to begin remediation. They shorted out one by one. Small sparking sounds, pop, 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 2 at once. Then the last one alone, slightly delayed as if it had taken a moment to consider its options. Raylex counted 7 drones. He was not sure why he counted them. His assignment was still open on the desk pad. He had written 14 words of it since arriving at the commissary. Medical drones poured through the emergency sealing ports, 30 of them in a swarm, scanners and injection arrays. Calm automated voices repeating, "Please remain still." Medical assistance is being provided in 11 languages simultaneously, which produced a sound like a religious ceremony conducted by machines having an argument. Behind them came 2 physicians in full hazmat gear. Dr. Pashek, a Tauri, 4-armed, rigid-faced, with the particular stillness of a species whose emotional responses were visible only in their upper limbs, crossed directly to Dressic. She scanned him. Her lower arms kept working, pulling instruments and running checks. Her upper arms went completely still. She tapped her communicator. Code Vidian. 2 words. The commissary knew what they meant before Raylex did. The sound that went through the room was not a scream. It was subtler than that. 200 species updating their threat assessment simultaneously. The containment barriers dropped from the ceiling in sections, meter-thick panels of transparent aluminum that divided the space into zones. Decontamination drones deployed from ceiling housing Raylex had never noticed before. Students were sorted by species and exposure level and herded into triage areas by the medical drones, which were very polite about it and completely non-negotiable. Raylex ended up in Zone 3, minimal exposure, 40 others, transparent barriers on all sides. He could see through them to Zone 1, where Dressic was on a stabilization platform with 4 lines running into his arm and still producing the low grinding groan, now slightly less continuous. The Scathari brothers were in separate containment pods. Their bodies had not stopped. The venom discharge had become autonomic and stayed that way, their nervous systems stuck in a loop they could not consciously override. Ghoul's orange was fading slowly, as suppressants reached it through a containment field that Raylex noted had to be replaced twice when the mucus ate through the first 2. He sat down on the Zone 3 bench and opened his data pad. The chemical analysis fragments were already coming through the medical network, partially redacted, formatted for first responder use. He read them in the order they arrived. Capsaicin, compound class, alkaloid, galactic effects, neurotoxic pain cascade, respiratory distress, mucous membrane inflammation, involuntary lacrimation, interaction with Scathari autonomic systems, triggers venom gland crisis response, interaction with plaque stress membranes, extreme mucus overproduction, interaction with Gore-Vathy pain receptors. He stopped reading and looked up for a moment, then looked back down. At the bottom of the capsaicin entry, below the interaction table, there was a footnote. He read it. He read it again. He set the data pad down on his knee and looked at the transparent barrier for approximately 30 seconds without blinking. The footnote said, capsaicin is not considered a weapon, toxin, or controlled substance on Earth. It is classified as a flavoring agent. Humans add it to food to make the food more interesting. Across the sealed commissary, on the far side of the containment barriers, a security officer approached Lucy's table. She had not been moved to a triage zone. She was in the original epicenter of the event, the east wall table, the small one, the one she always sat at, and she had not moved from it. The security officer, a vathy, tall and gray uniformed, stopped in front of her and looked down. "Are you the owner of the food container?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what was in it?" She took a bite of the backup sandwich, chewed, swallowed. Kimchi fried rice, black coffee, chocolate espresso beans, pickled garlic, wasabi peas. The officer did not write immediately. He appeared to be processing. Then he made a note on his data pad with great deliberateness, the careful tap of someone recording information they do not yet have a category for. "Are you aware that the contents of your container have caused a mass casualty event in this facility?" Lucy looked at him. Her expression did not change. "I told them not to eat it," she said. "You can check the cameras." The officer stared at her for a long moment, made another note, walked away. In Triage Zone 3, Rilex watched this exchange through the transparent barrier. He watched the officer's back as he walked away. He watched Lucy pick up the last piece of her backup sandwich. He looked at the footnote on his data pad again, flavoring agent, and then he looked back at her. His theory about forward-facing eyes, the one that had embarrassed him for months, was starting to feel less like a theory. The lockdown broadcast came at 2 hours and 14 minutes after Dressic 8. Every speaker in the Galactic Academy of Tesseran Prime activated simultaneously the emergency broadcast system, the full throughput one, the one that had never been used before in 300 years of operation. Grand Lecturer Soon's voice filled every corridor, every residential block, every lab and study space. Crystalline undertones, ancient and mineral, the voice of something that had been patient for a very long time and was now being something else. The commissary was sealed. The eastern residential corridor was restricted. All non-essential movement was suspended until further notice. Through the walls of Zone 3, Rilex could hear 200 species reacting in 200 different ways. Clicks and hums and subsonic vibrations, and one species that expressed alarm exclusively through a rapid color shift that he could see as a flickering through the Zone 3 barrier. The Tori students had gone fully rigid. The crystalline students had stopped vibrating and were very still instead, which in crystalline body language meant something Rilex did not want to think about right now. He looked at his data pad. He looked at Lucy, still visible through 2 layers of transparent containment barrier, finishing the last of her food, folding the wrapper with 3 small precise motions, placing it on the tray. He had a feeling, not quite dread, not quite awe, something that lived between the two and had no name in his language, that the 16-page mandatory human biology advisory this was going to generate was not going to cover everything. He was right about that, but he did not know yet how right. What he did not know yet, what no one in the academy knew, was what Earth actually was. The mob had been forming for an hour before anyone told Relax about it. He heard it first, through the walls of Triage Zone 3, past the hum of the containment barriers and the steady drip of decontamination foam and the low grinding groan that had finally, mercifully, gone quiet from Zone 1. He heard footsteps, not the random scatter of students moving between classes, organized footsteps, the kind that happen when a group has agreed, without saying it out loud, to move in the same direction at the same time. 12 of them by his count, maybe more. The Vathi security officer who had spoken to Lucy was now speaking into his communicator at the far end of the commissary, very quietly, with his back turned. Raylex watched him and noted that his shoulders were doing something security officers' shoulders were not supposed to do. He opened his data pad and went back to the capsaicin entry. He read it a fourth time. Then he closed it and opened the Xenobiology archive instead, the full one, not the first responder fragments, and typed a single word into the search field. Earth. The results took 4 seconds to load. That was longer than usual. The archive was old, the Earth entry older still, and what came back first was not the habitability classification, but a flag Relax had never seen on a species entry before. A small orange marker in the upper right corner of the page that said Advisory Pending Classification under Review. He stared at that flag for a moment. Then he scrolled down to the classification field. It said Class 12. He read that. He checked the scale key at the bottom of the page because he wanted to be certain he was reading the correct column. Most spacefaring species evolved on Class 2 or 3 worlds. The Vane homeworld was a Class 3 mild seasons, stable tectonics, predictable weather, low radiation. He had always considered it comfortable, normal, the baseline against which other worlds were measured. Class 12 was not the baseline. He was still reading when the Eastern Corridor alarm tripped. The mob had reached the sealed bulkhead between the commissary wing and the faculty residential passage. Relax could not see them yet. Zone 3's transparent barriers faced the commissary floor, not the corridor, but he could hear them. 12 sets of footsteps plus the particular acoustic signature of a Gorvathi moving with intent, which was different from a Gorvathi moving normally in the way that a storm front is different from a windy afternoon. He recognized at least 2 Scathari in the group by the dry clicking their scales made when they were agitated. And he heard something else. Voices, low and building, the multilingual sound of a group feeding each other's anger, each voice making the others a little louder. He heard someone say, in trade standard, that humans should not be allowed in the commissary. He heard someone else say something worse. Then he heard 3 other things, from further down the corridor, that stopped him mid-breath. One was a voice he recognized as Ben Carter's, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who has already finished the conversation and is now just speaking the conclusion out loud. One was a voice he did not recognize, female, with a precise clinical quality, laying out a series of statements in the calm tone of someone reading from a list they have already committed to memory. The third was silence, the particular quality of silence that comes from someone who has decided that speaking would be unnecessary. He could not get to the corridor. The Zone 3 barriers were sealed until Dr. Pashek cleared the triage. He pressed his palm against the transparent panel and looked toward the east exit and listened. Ben Carter was not a large person. Relax had seen him in the engineering labs, medium height, brown-skinned, the kind of build that suggested he worked with his hands and the hands had opinions. He wore his sleeves pushed up to the elbow. He was doing that now, Relax understood, because the Vathi guard who had relayed the corridor situation to Zone 3's monitoring screen had included a visual feed. Ben was standing in the center of the corridor passage with his weight distributed the way Relax had only seen in species with combat training. Not aggressive, not posturing. The decision already made stance of someone who has assessed the situation, run the numbers, and arrived at a conclusion he is comfortable with. Beside him, a girl Raylex placed as Nina Walsh from the Academy's medical volunteer program. She had her kit open on the floor, not for treatment, the instruments arranged with a precision that served no medical purpose. She was smiling. The smile did not reach her eyes. Raylex had studied enough human facial expressions to know that this particular combination, calm smile, flat eyes, slow breathing, was not a social expression. And against the wall, arms crossed, weight on her back foot. Lucy. She had not spoken yet. She was watching the front of the mob with the same forward-facing, level attention she directed at everything: food, assignments, structural support columns that creatures 8 times her mass had just walked into. Her heartbeat, which Raylex could still pick up faintly through the wall even now, had dropped to something he had no reference point for. Not slow, architectural, the rhythm of something that has been running a very long time and intends to keep running. The mob had stopped. Ben spoke first. "You can keep walking," he said, "or you can find out what happens next. I'm good either way." Not loud, not aggressive. The tone of someone stating the departure time of a transport, factual, mildly helpful, completely indifferent to whether you chose to board. The girl beside him, Nina, looked at the front rank of the mob and said, still with the smile, "I have treated 4 species for shock today. I know exactly which nerve clusters to hit to produce a similar effect without the biochemical element. I mention this not as a threat. I mention it because it's relevant information, and you seem like the kind of people who make decisions based on relevant information." She picked up one of her instruments from the kit on the floor, held it loosely, set it back down. A Tory student in the back row of the mob took one step backward, then another. Lucy had not moved, had not spoken. The mob's front rank, 2 Gorvathi, cousins of Dressic by the look of their plate coloring, were looking at her with the specific, focused attention of predators who have just noticed that the thing they were approaching has not moved away from them. She let them look. Then she said, very quietly, "You want to know what the strong version looks like?" Not a challenge, not a boast, a question asked with genuine curiosity, as if she were mildly interested in whether they had thought this through. The back row went first, then the middle. The 2 Gorvathi at the front held for 10 seconds, Raylex counted, before the one on the left looked at the one on the right, and the one on the right looked at Lucy, and something passed between them that Raylex could not name but recognized from every xenobiology lecture he had ever attended on prey-predator assessment. 12 against 3, the 12 walked away. Lucy watched them go. Her heartbeat ticked back up to its resting rate, the first time it had moved upward in 3 hours, and she uncrossed her arms and looked at Ben and said, "Thanks." Ben pushed his sleeves back down. "Don't mention it." "I mean it." "I know you do." He picked up Nina's kit from the floor, handed it to her, and the 3 of them turned back toward the triage processing area without discussing it further. The Vathi guard on Raylex's monitoring screen made a note. The note said, in trade standard, "Incident resolved without physical engagement." He stared at that phrase for a moment. Then he looked at the capsaicin footnote on his data pad, then at the orange advisory flag on the Earth entry, then back at the monitoring screen. Classification under review. He had been sitting with that phrase for 11 minutes. He was beginning to understand that the review was not going to go in one direction. The triage barriers came down at hour 3. Raylex walked out of Zone 3 into a commissary that smelled of decontamination compound and something underneath it, sharp, warm, still faintly present, and crossed to the east wall table. He was not certain why he crossed to the east wall table. He told himself it was because his assignment was still there. The assignment was there. He did not open it. He sat down and pulled up the xenobiology archive on his data pad and went back to the Earth entry and started at the beginning this time, not the classification field. He read the atmospheric composition section, an oxidizing atmosphere, corrosive to most unprotected biological material, that the species breathed continuously and called air. He read the tectonic section. He read the radiation section. He read the section on the biosphere and noted that the arms race it described had been running for 4 billion years with no resolution and no referee. Every organism simultaneously trying to eat something and avoid being eaten. Plants with neurotoxins, fungi that hijacked nervous systems, bacteria surviving in boiling acid. He was on the dietary table, 3 columns, compound name, galactic biological effects, what humans called it, when the commissary lights shifted to night cycle. He kept reading. Capsaicin, neurotoxic pain cascade in most species, what humans call it, spice. Caffeine, cardiac stimulant, class 3 controlled substance on 11 worlds, what humans call it, morning coffee. Theobromine, lethal at moderate doses for 40 known species, what humans call it, chocolate. He turned the data pad off, turned it back on, kept reading. He had a feeling, not dread, not yet, something colder and more structural, that the word Tier 9 was going to look very different by morning. What he did not know yet was that morning was going to be worse. He read through the night. The commissary light stayed on night cycle, blue shifted, quiet, the kind of light that exists for cleaning drones and insomniacs. Rilek sat at the east wall table with his data pad and read the Earth entry from the beginning, section by section. The way you read something when you suspect the conclusion is going to require you to revise a large number of other conclusions, and you want to be certain before you do. The tectonic section was 8 paragraphs. He read all 8. The weather section was longer. He read that too. He read about the axis tilt, the one that produced dramatic seasonal swings, portions of the surface freezing solid for months, other portions reaching temperatures lethal to unprotected biological material in hours. He read that humans had a word for the frozen period. They called it winter. They did not consider it unusual. They built structures for it and wore additional layers and continued their activities. He read about the lightning. He had to stop at the lightning, not because it was the worst thing in the entry. It was not, as it turned out, but because the entry mentioned it almost in passing, as one of several standard weather phenomena, between a section on liquid water falling from the sky in solid form and a section on electromagnetic storms. The entry noted that a lightning discharge carried enough energy to kill a human instantly. Then it moved on, as if this were context rather than the point. He kept reading. The biosphere section was where his theory stopped being embarrassing and started being something else. 4 billion years. That was the number the entry used. 4 billion years of an arms race with no resolution and no referee. Every organism on the planet simultaneously trying to eat something and avoid being eaten. The entry listed examples methodically, the way a manual lists components. Plants with contact neurotoxins, insects with paralytic compounds that rivaled Scathari venom in targeted precision, fungi that hijacked the nervous systems of their hosts and directed behavior from the inside, bacteria that not only survived in boiling acid but required it. And the predators. The entry spent 3 paragraphs on the predators, pack hunters, ambush specialists, creatures that had been applying evolutionary pressure to the human line for so long that certain human stress responses, the ones that made their pupils widen and their reaction times drop to near mechanical speeds, were not learned. They were structural, built in at the cellular level over hundreds of thousands of years of being hunted. Then the entry mentioned persistence hunting. Rilek read that section twice. He read about a species that had looked at prey faster than them, stronger than them, better armored than them, and had decided to simply walk after it, hour after hour, under open sky in direct radiation, burning their own reserves at a steady rate while the prey burned its reserves in desperate sprints. The prey's body would fail before the human's patience would. The last thing the prey saw, across hundreds of thousands of years of this, was the human still coming. Still walking, still completely calm. He set the data pad down on the table. He picked it up again. He opened the dietary table. 3 columns, compound, galactic biological effects, what humans called it. He read them in order. Capsaicin, galactic effects, neurotoxic pain cascade, respiratory crisis, involuntary lacrimation, mucous membrane inflammation, scathari, autonomic venom gland rupture. What humans called it, spice, used to make food more interesting. Caffeine, galactic effects, cardiac stimulant, elevated heart rate, systemic arousal response, class 3 controlled substance on 11 worlds, lethal at concentrated doses to 4 species currently enrolled at the Academy. What humans called it, morning coffee, consumed daily before most activities. Theobromine, galactic effects, lethal at moderate doses to 40 known spacefaring species. What humans called it, chocolate, given to children as a reward. Ethanol, galactic effects, cellular toxin, nervous system depressant, industrial solvent used in Starship component cleaning. What humans called it, drinks, consumed at social gatherings to relax. Allicin, galactic effects, sulfur-based enzyme disruptor affecting approximately 60% of spacefaring species, causes respiratory distress and systemic inflammation. What humans called it, garlic, put in almost everything they cooked. Allyl isothiocyanate, galactic effects, industrial-grade volatile compound, standard adhesive solvent in Starship hull construction, causes immediate mucous membrane crisis on contact. What humans called it, wasabi, eaten voluntarily with raw fish as a flavor enhancement. Raylex looked at the last row of the table, then at the commissary around him, empty and blue-lit and smelling of decontamination foam, then at the east wall table where he was sitting. Her table. He had been sitting at her table for 3 hours. The dread that arrived then was not sharp. It was architectural, the specific feeling of a load-bearing assumption giving way slowly, the way a structural support column cracks before it fails. He thought about the biometric lock on the lunchbox. He had noted it months ago and concluded it was excessive for a food container. It was not protecting the food. He wrote that in the margin of his data pad, in small, careful letters, and stared at what he had written for a long time. Grand Lecturer Soon's hearing chamber was formal in the way that only very old institutions manage, not decorated, but worn into seriousness by 3 centuries of decisions. Soon himself occupied the central position, crystalline, ancient, his mineral lattice structure catching the chamber light and breaking it into angles. Dr. Pashek stood to his left, her upper arm still. Commander Voley stood to his right. Lucy sat across from them in a chair that was too large for her. She had her bag on her lap. Hook 29, the pre-climax mundane beat. She reached into the bag and produced a small folded piece of paper, the kind made from compressed plant fiber, and smoothed it flat on the table in front of her with 2 careful strokes of her palm. Then she looked up. Soon stated the facts of the incident. Then he asked, "Miss Harper, did you knowingly bring chemical weapons onto this campus?" She looked at him. "It is my mom's cooking." She opened the folded paper. She cited page 14, section 3, paragraph 7 of the Terran Exchange Program Orientation Handbook. She listed the 5 items by name. She identified each: a vegetable preparation, a beverage, a dessert component, a seasoning, a condiment. She noted that none were classified as weapons, toxins, or controlled substances on Earth. She noted that she had stored them in regulation-sealed containment. She noted that she had eaten at the designated far table. She noted that she had issued a clear verbal warning. "The cameras confirm this," she said. "You can review the timestamp." Commander Voley said, "The food was hazardous to every other species in the facility." "Yes," Lucy said, "which is why I eat alone." "Then I did not break any rules." She laid the paper flat. Dressic Mall broke into my sealed container. Dressic Mall chose to eat my food after I warned him not to. The Orientation Handbook, page 14, section 3, is clear on the question of responsibility for consequences following a clear verbal warning. I can read it to you if that would help. The chamber was quiet. She reached into her bag again and produced a second piece of paper. I filed a formal harassment complaint on week 2 of term. The mediation office has a 6-week waiting list. This is the complaint. This is the timestamp. It has not been processed. She set it on the table beside the first paper. I followed every protocol available to me. The protocols did not function. Then Dressic Mall broke into my sealed food container and the commissary became a medical emergency. She folded her hands on the table. I would like to know which rule I broke. Dr. Pashek's upper arms had not moved since the hearing began. She said quietly, "She is correct. I reviewed the footage. The warning is audible and clear. She followed the protocol precisely." The silence that followed had weight. Not the weight of uncertainty, the weight of an institution absorbing something it had not built frameworks for. Soon said, "No rule was broken, Miss Harper." 3 words. They landed in the chamber like something physical. No warning, no prior review, no consultation with the Species Classification Committee. The campus-wide mandatory human biology advisory went out at 600 the following morning, 16 pages, the first in 3 centuries of academy operation. Dr. Pashek's compound table in full. The dietary section. The adrenaline section, the part that noted humans could sustain significant physical trauma and remain conscious, mobile, and functional through an involuntary response that could not be consciously overridden. The persistence hunting section, 3 paragraphs, which several species would later report reading more than once. The final page, Homo sapiens reclassified, Tier 9 right arrow Tier 4 provisional, significant threat potential, exercise appropriate caution in all interactions. Dressic, Vass, Tok, and Ghoul were suspended for the remainder of the term, families notified, academic standing flagged for review. The 12 students from the Eastern Corridor received formal conduct violations. The Gorvathi, who had held longest at the front, received an additional sanction. The mediation office hired 2 additional staff members. The 6-week waiting list was eliminated. Soon personally oversaw a revised interspecies conduct code, drafted in 2 weeks, implemented in 4. The commissary was physically rearranged. Tables shifted. A larger clear space opened around the east wall area. Capsaicin-specific filtration was added to the ventilation system. Decontamination drones ran double shifts for a week. Lucy's harassment complaint was processed, resolved, and formally entered into the Academy record. The entry noted, complainant followed all available protocols correctly. Institutional response inadequate. Protocol reform initiated. The mockery was gone. What replaced it was something Rielex spent several days trying to name before settling on reverent unease, the careful, watchful attention of 200 species who had updated their threat models and were not entirely comfortable with the update. Students who had walked past Lucy's locker without acknowledgement for months now nodded. Not warmly, carefully, the way you acknowledge something you have decided to take seriously. The Quillic, who had been knocked down by the venom spray, made its way to her table 3 days after the lockdown lifted and produced a soft clicking sound. Thank you in Quillic body language. Then left without waiting for a response. Nina Walsh went back to the medical volunteer program. Dr. Pashek began including her in case consultations. Ben Carter went back to his engineering lab and was exactly the same as before, which was, Rielex was beginning to understand the most alarming thing about him. On the morning the lockdown lifted, Rielex crossed the commissary. Every eye followed. He could feel it, the rustle and click of 200 species tracking unexpected movement, the way a room shifts when something happens outside the established pattern. He reached the east wall table. He stood there with his tray. "Is this seat taken?" Lucy looked up, forward-facing eyes steady, the particular calm of something that has been at rest for a long time and has no plans to change. She looked at him for a moment, the same assessing look, the one he had felt in the corridor through the monitoring screen, the one that made the back of his neck do something he did not have vocabulary for. Then she smiled. Small, genuine, crinkled at the corners. "Go ahead." He sat, she went back to eating. The comfortable silence of two people who have decided to try. "What are you eating?" She tilted the new lunchbox toward him, biometrically locked, brushed gray surface, the panel glowing blue. Inside, small white triangular objects wrapped in dark dried plant material, each one precisely folded. They smelled of salt and something warm and mild that he had no reference for. "Onigiri, rice balls, salmon, no capsaicin, no caffeine, no garlic. My mom packed extra this week." She tilted it further. "Completely safe." He took one, held it in two of his four hands, turned it over. Someone had put genuine care into making this, the fold precise, the weight even, the ingredients considered. He took a bite. Salt and ocean and something clean and mild that his xenobiology archive had no entry for. The outer layer mineral crisp. Simple. "Not bad." "Told you." They ate. The commissary returned to its rhythm around them, slowly, not quite reaching the pattern it had run for 3 centuries. Not quite normal. Everyone in the room understood it would not be quite normal again. The Quillic at a nearby table nodded at Lucy. She watched it leave with a puzzled expression. "What was that about?" "You," Rilek said. "All of this is about you." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything, I just ate lunch." He looked at his data pad. The Earth entry was still open, the classification field, the orange advisory flag, the dietary table. He had a line written in the margin in small, careful letters from the night before. He read it once more. Then he closed the archive. The species classification database still said Tier 4 provisional, pending further study. He looked at that phrase and thought about what it meant to put a number on something that had spent 4 billion years eating everything that tried to kill it, and then packaged the results in a biometrically locked lunchbox and carried it onto a space station and warned you clearly not to open it. The crowd parted for her as she left, gently, without drama, the way you make space for something you have decided to take seriously. He looked at the margin note on his data pad one final time. The containers were not protecting the food, they were protecting us.